All right, we're joined by Ishmael Johnson.
That's not what I'm saying.
Editor of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine. It's a basketball edition. And Baylor, with their four horsemen, so to speak, back from the team that had to have the season shut down, are on the cover. Ishmael joins us. Paul, Craig, I'm David Smoak. Ishmael, was there any doubt that would be the cover? What was the discussion about putting Baylor on the cover of your magazine for the basketball season?
The only hesitation was, I guess, editorial, decisions of, like, do we want to put Baylor on the cover twice? But obviously because Lauren Cox was on it last year. But I think when you boiled it down, I don't see how four of the five starters of probably the best team in the country last season coming back, Jared Butler's going to have a National Player of the Year type season, in my opinion. I don't see how that wasn't the biggest story in the state.
Yeah, what is the most fascinating thing to you about the way this Baylor team's been built?
I think it's interesting because they almost Scott Drew his career's kind of been a little polarizing. Some people close to the program feel that. So I feel like he gets a lot of unfair comparisons to Kim Mulkey, obviously, and then some people may criticize him and say, he hasn't done this, he hasn't done X, Y, and Z. I think other people feel like he's actually done a lot for Baylor, and he's established them as a consistent program in the national landscape. And last year was kind of one of the first years where he adjusted, I think was one of his biggest adjustments. He went away from that zone defense. It was more the no middle defense he went to, where it's kind of man-to-man based, where they just take away every driving lane in the middle. And that changed the team. And that, Texas Tech runs a version of that, but he implemented it in a way that maximized those guys. You had guys like Freddie Gillespie and Mark Vital who aren't, they're not going to get you buckets, but nobody's going to score on those guys. And then you had Jared Butler and Maceo Teague and Davion Mitchell, who are just lockdown defenders as well. And it just made them unscorable. Like you couldn't score 60 points on those guys some nights. And that was one of the biggest adjustments that I've seen, because we're so used to seeing Scott Drew play that zone defense, and then he just switched for 1 year, and all of a sudden Baylor flourishes.
Ishmael, this is obviously a very close team. I mean, they've said it constantly in interviews how much they love being in the locker room together, how much they love playing with each other, and that obviously played a big role in the decisions to return for guys like Jared Butler. Were you guys able to sense that cohesiveness with this group of guys while working on the story, working on the cover?
Oh, for sure. Like, that's one of the things Shahan J. Raja hints on in the beginning is those guys that he opens the story. You'll be able to read it on Monday on TexasBasketball.com. He opens the story with them realizing that the season got canceled, right? They're in the hotel. They're getting ready for the tournament. And, like, he goes through and he talks to a bunch of the guys about just what their reactions were. And then he talks to Scott Drew about that specific team and the camaraderie that team had. Because to play a system like that, to be able to trust the guys that, there's such a reliance on help defense, and be able to have that trust to be able to say, okay, if I get beat, there's going to be somebody there. There's going to be Mark right there behind me. Jared's not going to get beat a lot, but when I am, last year Freddie's going to be there, probably Tristan Clark this year. There is, like, in my opinion, with any intense defensive team, you're going to need guys who you just say, okay, this guy has my back, I have this guy's back. Nothing's going to happen in this area, when we're guarding this area, things like that. It is a really cohesive team, and you really get that.
So this Baylor team, obviously, we don't know what would have happened, but they were surely set up to have a heck of a run, despite they had kind of start to have some slippage. They are, and they have both Butler back and, of course, Teague. They dipped their toe in the water. And the thing is, they're deep, and they've got some new ones coming in. They got some youngins coming in to make them even better, it appears, that make this team almost to the point where you wonder, I'm not concerned because of what Coach Drew and Jerome Tang and that staff do, but are there enough basketballs to go around?
I mean, that's a good question, right? I mean, that's always a big question with whenever you add. I mean, you could probably argue they're probably 10 deep. Right? Last year where they played maybe 7. But obviously you bring back most of the starting 5. You add guys like Adam Flagler. You add guys like LJ Cryer as a freshman. Flo Bamba's going to have his next year, obviously coming back. Tristan Clark's obviously back, things like that. Like, yeah, sure. I mean, that's definitely a concern to some extent. But then again, like, they're not really a team that's going to ask anybody to go out and score 15, right? Jared Butler might get that. But for the most part, these are guys that are, Mark and Freddie were scoring 6 points a game last year. They were okay with that, right? And like, it's going to be one of those moments where it's like, okay, you might score 4 points, but we got to make sure that we lock down, Matt Coleman at Texas, or we lock down, Kyler Edwards at Tech.
Do you see this team maybe having multiple guys in double figures, though, that weren't last year?
Oh, for sure. I think you look at, obviously, Butler is going to be that guy. Teague, I would not be surprised if Mitchell takes that step as well. I'm curious to see who that next guy is, because there were some games last year where they got a little too reliant on Jared Butler, and you saw him kind of at times feel the need to probably jack up some shots that weren't there. I'm curious if they find somebody in the post that they can maybe throw the ball to a little bit more than last year. That's going to be the biggest concern for me. Spoiler alert, they're number 2 in our national top 25, just behind Gonzaga. But I think those two teams are far and away leagues ahead of everybody else right now.
And we'll get to see them play, right? Gonzaga and Baylor, so that'll be a good one. Hey, what's the biggest difference in putting together the basketball edition versus the football edition?
The biggest difference is honestly just commitment, because we're putting together the basketball edition in the middle of football season. And so having to prioritize time, because obviously I do write for the website, Shahan does too, and then having to prioritize time for, okay, here's my high school football day, right? Friday night, I'm kind of booked. Saturday, Shahan's kind of booked. And so prioritizing time, organizing things like that in the middle of, arguably the biggest sports time in Texas, that's always the biggest challenge. But it's always we always get it done, and it's always fun.
I got to tell you something. I don't think people realize this. I do, because I once for so long, nearly 30 years, spent time in East Texas, and there are a ton of just basketball schools only, where in football there are 12 to 1,300. In basketball, you add names like Natchez and Avenger and LaPointer and on and on and on. I mean, it seems like it would be even more difficult because of the numbers of schools that you have to cover as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we have over 3,000, because you got boys and girls too, right?
3,000?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because you're boys and girls. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so that's where somebody like R.V. Bogus, who's my co-editor, he takes a lot of the high school bulk off my hands, because obviously it's huge, right? It's double the size in terms of schools. It's double the size of football, and so he's a huge help in getting a lot of those done. And we have just a great team. I mean, those guys. RV is one of the biggest workhorses I know, and there's not, he'll ask if I can take some things off his hands just so he can make sure that his stuff that he's focusing on is perfect and in touch. And I mean, he's been my partner for about a couple of years now, ever since I joined the team. So I couldn't be doing it without him.
Yeah, that's a bunch. Golly.
That's a lot of work.
Double it up, plus schools that don't play football. Craig?
Absolutely. Ishmael, without revealing too much, obviously, because you want people to buy and read the magazine, but what's kind of the, I guess, general consensus on, kind of the lay of the land around the rest of the state? Obviously, Texas Tech will expect it to be a great team. Greg Brown going to Texas and Shaka Smart being there with all that's going on. What's sort of the overall feeling heading into this season for Texas basketball as a whole?
I think, and this is kind of a little hint that I gave in my editor's letter in the magazine that you guys will see, it's kind of been, for better or worse, a little bit of a showcase of basketball in Texas the past couple of years. You go back to Chris Beard making the title game. You go back to the women winning last year for Baylor. You go back to, obviously, the men, or excuse me, I should say. You go back to the men almost making a run themselves before it got canceled. And then you go back and you look at Texas and you look at Tech. I think those two teams are potentially top 15 if they really get things right. We'll see with Texas, obviously. But then you even look at, on the women's side, you look at Vic Schaefer going to Texas. You look at Ken Mulkey, who's just going to run it back with a bunch of players. D.D. Richards probably going to step up and be their big player now that Lauren Cox is gone. You look at Tech bringing in Krista Gerlich, who I think was a great hire on the women's side. You look at TCU, who is going to take a step back, but I think everybody knows that they're a capable team now under Jamie Dixon. I just see like a bunch of depth. You look at the mid-majors even, Stephen F. Austin's going to be there on both the men's and women's side. You look at Sam Houston State. I just think that when you look at top to bottom, Texas is all obviously looked at as football first, right? Always, no matter what, that's going to be what the state's judged on. But for so many years, it's always been just take what you get with basketball. Okay, yeah, Texas is good here. Baylor men did, they made the Sweet 16, cool. But now there's actually expectation and national prominence and actual prestige now on the hardwood in a way that, at least as long as I've been alive, I'm still young, but I can't remember the last time where, we've had three, potentially in the men's side, 3 or 4 top 15 teams on the women's side, potentially again with A&M. I didn't even mention them. 3 or 4 top 15 teams as well, and like you're expecting them to be good.
Anything else, guys?
Nope.
Craig? All right. Thank you, Ishmael.
Great job.
Appreciate you jumping on with us. Good stuff. And it's not just because Baylor's on the cover, Lauren Cox last year. It's a something that a lot of times if you don't really think about how much you guys are putting together, and not just the columns or the stories or the features, but the overviews, it's amazing. Thanks for your time. I'm glad that I love the basketball edition. It was a long time coming. I know you guys are proud of it, and you should be. Thanks for your time. Ishmael Johnson with us, the managing editor of the Dave Campbell's basketball magazine, with Maceo Teague, Mark Vidal, Jared Butler, and Donovan Mitchell on the cover.
Pretty cool. Yeah, they put that out yesterday. I think, Alvin Brooks on Scott Drew's staff had put out the picture initially, and I got kind of a buzz going, and then Dave Campbell's officially announced it yesterday. And, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, there's been I wonder how many covers there were 2013 of Baylor athletes on the cover, because it seems like there's been a flurry. Remember there was the one with Browse and Oakman and Petty.
Armstrong. While Craig is talking, you want to take a picture of that in case you don't have it up?
Yeah, there was the one of Browse, Oakman, Petty out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Out in front of McLean Stadium. You've had Lauren Cox on the cover, and Matt Rule was going to be on that bad boy. Had he stuck around a little while longer as well, I think that was pretty close to happening. But great for Scott Drew and the Baylor men. That's great exposure for them.
I agree. I think Rule would have
Davion Mitchell, by the way. You said Donovan.
I said Davion Mitchell. Absolutely, Matt Rule would have been in play for what he did last year with Baylor, unless Texas decided it was time for them to have somebody else in the cover.
Is that they get to make the call?
Well, there's another little